The movie begins with a young man named Arnab, who is managing a printing press, and a woman named Piali, who is a nurse. The two of them meet to get to know each other after their arranged marriage is decided. Piali looks like a cheerful and energetic young girl, while Arnab, on the other hand, looks rather nervous and anxious. They talk a bit and get to know each other. Soon after, Arnab and his family return to their home. On the way, it is raining heavily. His parents ask him about the girl and question whether he liked her or not. The boy shyly confirms his attraction, but he also makes sure that his parents stop pressuring him for marriage if this try also fails. Turns out, the poor boy is being pressured for quite some time now. As the family is cheerfully engaging in lighthearted teasing, their car accidentally collides with something. Petrified, his father hastily slams the brakes, but it is already too late. With fear etched onto his face and a beating heart, Arnab descends the car and approaches the form that they hit lying some distance away. It turns out to be an elderly woman. His mother follows suit and their hearts sink when they realize that the old woman has succumbed to the accident and passed away. The scene shifts and we see Arnab's family in a police station. His father is being questioned by the police regarding the accident. The poor old man looks terrified as he recounts the incident. The ensuing investigation leads the police, along with Arnab, to the woman's remote forest dwelling, an old hut. As they look around, they find a frightened and chained girl. The poor girl is named Roxana and she happens to be the old woman's daughter. She is then taken to the police station to identify her mother's corpse. Roxana is a peculiar girl. She seems like she has been poorly treated for quite some time and kept like less than a human. Despite poor treatment, she caresses her mother's corpse in the police station, humming for her to sleep well. Seeing this, Arnab feels heartbroken. His heart goes out for the poor lonely girl and he apologizes for the incident, vowing to help her in the funeral rites. He is moved by a sense of responsibility and compassion for Roxana. There is also a sense of guilt as he knew that the old woman did not jump before their car and his father lied. His selfish mother tries to stop him from meddling in the girl's life, afraid of her husband being convicted for the crime he committed, but Arnab refuses to listen. On the other side, a shocking revelation surfaces when a mortuary assistant identifies a strange cult's mark on Roxana's mother's skin. He rushes out of there and makes a call to inform his superior of this incident. The scene shifts and we see an elderly man named Professor Ali. He is sitting on a dining table engaging in conversation with a young student who asks about jinns. As he is explaining the subject, the professor gets a phone call from one of his past acquaintances named Faris. Looking at his phone, the man becomes serious and quickly gets up to go and attend the phone call. That night, we see Professor Ali remembering the past and how he injured one of his eyes. It turns out that in the past, the professor used to head a group of vigilantes, aiming to rescue impregnated women. These poor women were kidnapped by the members of a group named Ala Chakra, a sinister cult in Bangladesh fixated on continuing a demon named Ifrit's bloodline. Their method involved summoning Ifrit and forcing these women to bear his offspring. The professor and his group kept these pregnant women captive until childbirth, followed by immediately ending the lives of the demonic by severing their heads and preserving them in glass jars. He remembers how during one of these rituals, a woman had injured his eye and escaped before the professor could take her baby. However, this extreme approach faced opposition from the government, leading to Professor Ali's group's closure due to its radical and violent method. Back to the present. The next day, we see Arnab accompanying Roxana in taking out her mother's funeral. There as the women light up incense, Roxana starts acting out. She hides in the stairs and painfully looks at Arnab, asking him to stop the incense. Although the man is puzzled, he does as she asks. Later in the evening, he walks the poor woman back home and forgets his way out, ending in the woman walking him back out. As he drives away, Roxana comes back through the dark and creepy woods. The poor woman is secluded in the forest for so long that she is unfamiliar with the ways of the modern world. On her way back, she is haunted by haunting and unsettling visions of jinns. It turns out that Roxana is none other than the child of the woman who had escaped from Professor Ali. The next day, while Arnab is on his shift, he gets a call from Piali, who has agreed to their marriage. She asks him to meet and they visit a park together. There, she tells the man about her previous relationship with a doctor. Although it was serious and they were together for 4 years, it ended. Before she can tell him more, they are interrupted by a little boy and Piali hesitates before dropping the subject altogether. She is clearly withholding some information, but Arnab looks like he couldn't care less. On the other hand, we see Roxana fetching water from outside when she hears rustling noises nearby. After looking around, she brushes off her concerns and goes back home. She is unaware of the fact that Professor Ali has reached her abode, fully armed and ready to take her out. Inside her house, Roxana waits for Aband0ned. As the call to prayer starts, she quickly dips her head inside the water bucket to block out the verses. It seems that the Aband0ned pains the woman due to her connection with the evil jinn. As the Aband0ned comes to an end, the professor breaks in to capture Roxana, but turns out that she had already sensed their presence and escaped. That night, Arnab is unable to sleep. He tosses and turns and goes out to have a puff of cigarettes. When he comes back in, he finds strange, wet footprints inside. Alarmed, he takes a vase and follows the prints. These lead him to his bedroom and vanish under the bed. With a beating heart, he crouches down and finds Roxana whimpering in fear. Startled, he falls back. Shortly after, the woman tells him that a man is after her. He wants to take her life. Turns out the professor has been after Roxana for a very long time, and had even found her once, but she had escaped with her mother back then too. Arnab is skeptical, but seeing the girl's condition, his heart melts and he lets her stay with him. He takes care of the girl by giving her ointment for her wounds and warm milk to calm her down. The next morning, after preparing her meals, he goes to the office. On the other side, the professor is approached by Faris and they wonder what they are doing wrong, since it is the third time that they lost the girl. Back in Arnab's house, poor Roxana is trimming her nails when she is haunted by the jinns again. Scared, she runs to the washroom and locks herself in. All of a sudden, the same scary woman materializes beside her and she shrieks in fright, dipping her head inside the bucket of water to cut out the haunting voices. Later, when Arnab comes back, he finds the food that he made for Roxana untouched on the table and the woman locked inside the washroom. When she comes out, he hands her new clothes that he bought for her. He then mentions that he is looking for a good ashram. Hearing this, the woman freaks out and refuses to go. Scared, she hides under the bed and doesn't come out. In the middle of the night, Arnab finds her going through the trash in search of food and is startled. He then feeds her and puts her to sleep. The next day, they visit an ashram for Roxana to stay. They look around and after looking at the bad conditions and a scared Roxana, Arnab decides to take her back home. They start to spend more and more time together. Roxana finds herself falling deeply in love with Arnab. However, her past holds dark secrets tied to a cult. On one fateful night, Roxana falls ill, showing symptoms that alarm Arnab. Mistaking her discomfort for a menstrual cycle, Arnab remains unaware of the real cause. It turns out to be a monthly purification process necessary for Roxana, due to the poison her body generates from her demon heritage. In a desperate act to expel this toxic substance, Roxana sneaks out through the balcony at night while the man is asleep. Groaning in pain, she goes out and finds a stray dog. She initially caresses the dog but soon tragically resorts to fatally harming the poor animal. Her face transforms into a sinister entity and blood drips down her mouth as she uses her bite to release the lethal venom. On the other side, we see Professor Ali visiting a jinn for information regarding Roxana. She tells the man that the woman is happy and has a man accompanying her, but she is not aware of her location. Before the professor departs, the jinn warns him that Roxana would take them all out one by one. The next morning, Arnab wakes up to find Roxana up and about. She is inside the room, sketching the pictures of the dog. He smiles as he flips through her sketchbook but stops at a certain sketch of him and herself. Suddenly, he gets a call from Piali and goes out to answer. This makes the poor woman's heart sink in despair. Following this, Arnab sets off to go to his office. On the way, he sees a group of people surrounding the poisoned dog outside. On the other hand, Piali has a hard time during one of her operations. Back at home, poor Roxana is once again haunted by a jinn. It is the same one who was approached by the professor for her whereabouts. She gets up and rushes to find the nail cutter. As she bursts into the washroom, she notices the bucket of water. Slowly, she approaches it and crouches down. Suddenly, demonic hands rush out and pull her head inside the water. She blacks out and sees a vision of the past. In this vision, she sees the jinn cult and her mother being forced to take part in the ritual. Her poor mother is strung to an altar and the people surrounding her are all chanting strange verses. Then, her mother is branded with a hot iron rod. That night, as Arnab comes back home, he finds her hands and feet bleeding. Turns out that she used a knife to after failing to find the nail cutter. Angry, the man scolds her and applies ointment on her wounds. This tender moment pushes Roxana to confess her love for Arnab, and the two intimately share their feelings, culminating in a moment of passion. On the other side, the jinn laughs happily at the turn of events. The tranquility of their love is shattered the next morning when Professor Ali confronts Arnab, revealing the truth about Roxana's sinister nature. Despite the revelation, Arnab staunchly refuses to accept the grim reality presented to him. That night, Arnab comes home late after going out drinking. He is disturbed by the events of the day. Meanwhile, Roxana is happily getting ready at home. She is smiling contentedly, waiting for Arnab to come back. As Arnab makes his way back home, the morgue assistant secretly follows him. He soon finds out and confronts the stalker. Tensions escalate swiftly as the two engage in a fierce confrontation, resulting in Arnab sustaining injuries during the scuffle. The morgue assistant runs off after hitting the poor man. Shortly after, as Arnab comes back home, Roxana is startled to find him in such a vulnerable state. He looks out of it as he keeps mumbling at her to tell him about what she plans to do with him. He questions her identity after remembering all the things that the professor told him. Roxana, however, is only interested in who hurt him. He tells her about the morgue assistant and passes out after. The woman tends to his wounds and leaves him to rest. On the other side, we see the morgue assistant on a call, frantically trying to defend himself. The phone cuts and he gulps down a drink. All of a sudden, he hears noises coming from inside the morgue and goes out to investigate. There, he finds a few corpses pulled out and angrily pushes them back inside the containers. In a startling turn of events, Roxana lunges at him fiercely, ending the life of the morgue assistant in a fit of anger. Before she can escape, she is seen by another man who works there. She does not hurt the other man and quickly leaves the place. The next morning, Arnab wakes up to find Roxana lying near him. She tenderly asks about his condition, but he looks a little distant. Just then, he receives a call from Piali and goes out to answer it. Seeing this, Roxana is overcome with a surge of possessiveness and jealousy towards Arnab's connection with Piali. She senses someone coming and rushes to tell Arnab, who is busy on the call. Arnab checks to see that it is none other than Piali. He asks Roxana to stay inside the room before letting Piali in. The woman is worried for Arnab after seeing the wound on his forehead. She asks him to fetch some first aid so she can dress the wound. As he goes, she enters the room, but luckily it is empty. There seems to be no one there, not even under the bed. Arnab is both worried and relieved. After dressing his wound, Piali tries to kiss him, but Arnab sees a glimpse of Roxana on the window and, startled, pushes Piali away. Rejected and embarrassed, Piali quickly rushes out. Just then, Roxana materializes inside the room, shocking Arnab once more. Before he can ask more, she kisses the man. Just then, Piali comes in to grab her forgotten phone. Seeing the situation, she quickly grabs her phone and rushes out with Arnab on her toe. Despite his tries, the heartbroken woman quickly leaves. Angry, Arnab rushes back in to confront Roxana about the chaos that she created. He tells her that there is nothing between them and what happened the other day was nothing but a mistake on his part. In a fit of anger, the man tells her to get out of his house. When Roxana does not budge, he grabs her arm to push her out, but to no avail. The situation is made worse when Roxana becomes suddenly angry. After realizing the gravity of her actions, Roxana quickly lets him go and apologizes again and again. Panicked, he rushes inside his room and quickly locks the door, sinking down to the floor. Meanwhile, back in the morgue, the professor arrives. He finds the poisoned body of the deceased morgue assistant. In the CCTV cameras, they find Roxana and quickly come to a fitting conclusion. The woman took his life as an act of revenge after he attacked her lover. Back at home, in an act of apology, Roxana makes the sketch of Piali for Arnab. As he comes out of the room, he finds her packing her clothes. It turns out that she has decided to leave after all. Watching her pack her clothes, Arnab asks her to stay for the time being, assuring her she can leave once the ashram opens. Sometimes later, we see Arnab watching TV where he comes across news about the morgue assistant's demise. Shaken by the disturbing events and realizing the veracity of Professor Ali's warning, Arnab delves into extensive research about Ifrit. He wants to understand the grim truth behind Roxana's nature. His investigation uncovers chilling information. Ifrit is an ancient evil jinn who was worshipped. Young girls in Dhaka were abducted and used as means to continue this evil entity's lineage. His investigation helps him to know all about the Alad Chakra cult and Professor Ali's group that fought against this evil. The children born to Ifrit have an unnaturally rapid gestation period, being born within a month instead of the standard 9 months and without an umbilical cord. These children are born with poison inside their bodies, which must be excreted every month or else they would pass away due to it. The only reason for the birth of such children is to continue the devil's lineage. Back at home, we see Roxana struggling to bear the pain that the poison is causing her. As she gets up to go out, she sees a chain attached to her food. She follows it to find it connected to her illusion. The illusion sits on the floor of the living room with a baby in her lap. She is smeared in blood and she feeds the same crimson. Seeing this, Roxana screams and rushes out, but the door slams shut. Later, as Arnab comes back home, he finds a whimpering Roxana on the living room floor. Seeing him, the woman rushes to hug him. The bag on his shoulder falls and she hears the rustling noise of the chains. Her heart breaks, yet she agrees to get chained inside the bedroom if it means that Arnab will not abandon her. As Arnab locks her inside, she reveals startling news. Turns out that she is pregnant. Just then, she hears someone approaching and quickly ushers Arnab to go and shut the door. However, before any resolution can be reached, Professor Ali and his men hasten to Arnab's side. Roxana watches in disbelief as the man that she loves leaves her side. The professor's men take drastic measures, immobilizing and subjecting Roxana to torment. They aim to induce her demise through her own poison. Despite Roxana's pleas and cries for Arnab's help, he remains paralyzed by distress and helplessness. He eventually departs from the harrowing scene, consumed by desolation. Everyone leaves the place, leaving a tied-up Roxana alone with the professor. He then takes out a huge whip and starts to torment the poor helpless being. In the meantime, Arnab arrives at his parents' house. 3 agonizing weeks later, Piali pays a visit to Arnab at his parents' home. Turns out, the man has been locked up in his room and refuses to go outside. He lets the girl in and quickly locks the door after her. Piali gets angry at his behavior. She is unaware of the fact that he is behaving like this because of her calling off the marriage. Instead, it is something else. Just then, a sorrowful Arnab, burdened by guilt and regret, confides in her about the devastating truth regarding Roxana's tragic fate. Their conversation forces Arnab to confront his own culpability, leading him to a stark realization. As heinous as her actions may have been, leaving Roxana to meet such a cruel fate was a choice he deeply regrets. Although he calls the woman a monster, who exactly is the real monster here? Back on the other side, Roxana is subjected to relentless beating. Her stomach has bulged up with her baby and her body is smeared with crimson red blood. As she bears the pain, her eyes land on a portrait of Piali that she sketched for Arnab. On the other side, Piali finally confesses what she couldn't before about her previous relationship. It turns out, she was pregnant with her ex's baby. They were going steady when her boyfriend called off on their relationship. She was left with no choice but to abort the baby. She tells Arnab how she still feels the baby's heartbeat sometime. This revelation makes Arnab rethink his choices. He rushes back to Roxana's side. In a chilling turn of events, Roxana is nowhere to be found. It turns out that after enduring relentless beatings, she had summoned unexpected strength, breaking free from her captors. Aband0ned finds the house trashed and empty. On the other side, the professor is resting when he finds Roxana in his room. Startled, he starts reciting holy verses, but they don't seem to have any effects on the woman. She slowly approaches the panicked man and unleashes a fatal strike against him. As the man falls to his demise, she takes out the hands-free covering her ears and promptly leaves his property. Just as she leaves, the professor's phone rings with a call from Aband0ned. A tad bit too late for a warning call. Breathing hard, Aband0ned contemplates where exactly would Roxana go. Just then his eyes land on the sketch of Piali lying nearby. A grim realization dawns on him. He quickly dials Piali's number to warn her that Roxana is hastening towards her location. He warns her to shut all the windows and gates and sit tight before he arrives. After that, Aband0ned quickly gets inside his car and rushes towards Piali. In the meantime, Piali hears noise and goes out to investigate. There, she finds a bloody Roxana biting into her. This grotesque sight creeps the hell out of her, and with a panicked shriek, she rushes into another room. There, she quickly shuts the doors tight and hides, but not for long. Shortly after, Roxana finds her way to her. Upon taking hold of her, a violent encounter ensues where she suffers injuries at Roxana's hands. Just before the berserk woman bites into her flesh, the TV turns on, making a welcome distraction. Taking advantage of the situation, Piali grabs a piece of furniture and hits Roxana. The latter falls on her stomach and groans in pain. Piali, crying, hides in a nearby room, but she soon starts hearing the poor woman groaning in pain. Mustering up her courage, she barges in with a heavy stick in hand, ready to strike. Once inside, Piali finds herself torn between her nursing instincts and her fear. After an intense internal struggle, the woman chooses her duty and humanity over the latter. As fate would have it, Roxana's tumultuous journey reaches a critical moment as she goes into labor. Piali, despite the torment she endured, chooses to help Roxana. She selflessly aids Roxana in delivering the baby. The miraculous baby is born, and contrary to expectations, the baby possesses an umbilical cord, signifying its humanity. Roxana rejoices seeing that and entrusts the newborn to Piali's care before vanishing into the shadows. Shortly after, Aband0ned arrives and sees their baby. After hearing that Roxana has vanished, he sets out again to find her. A guilt-ridden Aband0ned, racing against time and driven by an unyielding need to find Roxana, arrives at the old hut. There, he discovers Roxana on the brink of demise, overwhelmed with grief and desperation. In a tragic display of love and sorrow, Aband0ned embraces her, apologizing for leaving her when she needed him the most. Roxana confides in Aband0ned, revealing that the child is human, unlike her. In her final moments, Roxana valiantly resists her innate impulse to harm Aband0ned by releasing her poison, opting instead to contain it within herself. The movie ends with Aband0ned concluding that Roxana's love transcended the malevolence of Ifrit, ultimately transforming the child into a symbol of humanity, contrary to the inherent hatred associated with Ifrit's legacy.